Welcome to the Recovery Cast, brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private.
Welcome back to another episode of the Recovery Cast, proudly brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private. My name is Oliver and I'm a former alcoholic and addict now in recovery. The Recovery Cast is a podcast created by people in recovery from alcoholism and addiction for people in recovery from alcoholism and addiction. This podcast is meant as a support tool for those in recovery. Everyone who participates in this podcast is in an active recovery program. We are not affiliated with any one recovery methodology and will focus on a variety of different types of recovery, including 12-step recovery, otherwise known as Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, and things like Smart Recovery, Celebrate Recovery, Recovery Dharma, Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, and more. And a quick disclaimer, this podcast is intended to be informative. A podcast alone cannot support your sobriety and recovery, so we suggest it only as one component of a daily recovery routine. For more information on what recovery is, please go to www.rehab.melbourne. I have a great episode planned for you, changing it up a little bit. For the reading today, which will be for today, the 24th of November, we are going to be reading out of the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. And we're going to be reading the chapter called We Agnostics, which is chapter 4. And I'm going to read a little bit of that and then just explain a little bit about the taboo thing that I definitely struggled with in my recovery, and I know a lot of people do. A lot of people try and avoid this topic, and a lot of people sort of just have some resentments around it, or it's just something that in my case I needed to sort of break down some barriers around, which is the concept of a higher power. I've heard it said that a higher power and early recovery don't mix, and my experience is actually otherwise, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But first I'm going to start reading from this chapter, We Agnostics. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made the clear distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. And I'm just going to stop there and say that yes, this book is about alcohol, but in my view, you can substitute the word alcoholic with addict. It's not all that important. People talk about, what was your drug of choice? Well, alcohol was one of them. Let's just put it that way. So I get a lot out of this, and even if you're perhaps alcohol wasn't a problem for you, you had issues with other substances or other behaviours, even behavioural things like gambling or anything that comes up. This works against those things as well. So anyway, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life. Or else. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be normal. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshalled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. It means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope arise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we have reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We look upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance at many individuals who claim to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you, we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make approach and to effect contact with Him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek Him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, and all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to all those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all. Now, I'm going to stop there because it goes on and on and on. I really like this chapter. It is super, Akron, Ohio, 1930s language, which is just, a product of the time. I think I had to certainly look past that and see the message of what these guys were writing about and sharing about. And I really, really like that line. We found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? And that ties into my experience of a higher power. I still cringe a bit when I'm talking about this. And it's great because I want to break that down with you here today. So I found my higher power through Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now book. And if you haven't read that, I really, really, really recommend getting a copy of it or downloading the audiobook version. He has an amazing German accent. It lulls me to sleep. And, I listen to it on audiobook when I'm going to sleep. It's really great. And it just answers a lot of the questions that I had about sort of my conception of a higher power. I don't believe in the God thing. I considered myself agnostic when I came into the fellowship. I didn't want to hear about Christianity or any religion. But for me, when I'm looking at a starlit night, I don't think who then made all this. I think, what is this and why is it here? And for me, that ties in with Eckhart Tolle's conception of what he calls the unmanifested, which is something so great and so powerful that you can't even name it. I think that everything is my higher power. So the universe, the nature, all things, other people, objects, the world around me, and my consciousness and my perception of it, that is my higher power, and it's so much greater than me. So when I'm sitting, I don't know, let's say this, I'm sitting on the beach watching the sea. It's something that is so powerful. It's something that I can't control. It's greater than me. And it's incredibly complex and beautiful. I didn't create it. I don't know what did create it. All I know is that it is. And I can't necessarily label this power. That's my higher power. So it's everything. And it's the present moment. It's the now, which is what Eckhart Tolle talks about. The power of now is that the now is something that I'm firmly rooted to, and it's a power greater than me because it always is. It's a very complex little concept, but I think I just had to find something and accept it and get past my preconceived ideas of spirituality, because the 12 steps are really, really firmly rooted in that spirituality, and it is available to all, as it says in this reading, in this book. And I've said this before on the podcast, if the concept of God scares you out of recovery, then using, drugs, alcohol, or whatever it is, it'll scare you back into recovery. I certainly know that there are two options for me, and one of them is a spiritual life, and the other one is, a life that is absolutely unbearable and awful and probably short. So I just had to accept this. And as it says in the chapter here, once I actually started to become open to it, things started clicking and working for me. And today I don't really sweat it. I don't stress about it. I just let things happen, and I'm not running the show. That's the main thing, is that my will can't control the world. I can't run my own life. I have to let things happen that are beyond my control, to do with something that's greater than me, which is just everything. Everything's greater than me. Everything else will decide what happens. I can do my little bit and I can do that next right thing, but ultimately the universe, or whatever you want to call it, will provide everything that I need. There might be good things, there might be bad things, but unfortunately it's actually beyond my control. So I encourage you to have a read of this book, the big book. It's chapter 4, and it starts on, what page are we on? Chapter 4, it's on page 44. Yeah, it's an interesting book. It's really worth checking out. Now, after the break, we're going to be talking about a new topic. We're going to be talking about the importance of a tidy living space and getting rid of the things that don't serve us and that we don't use. Stand by.
You're listening to the Recovery Cast by Hills and Rangers Private. Now playing daily on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. For more shows, visit us at www.rehab.melbourne.
All right, so we're going to be talking about how to stay tidy, how to keep your living space in order. And this is going to be interesting because I'm sitting here in my studio and I'm surrounded by mess. I'm gonna admit that I need to take on board my own advice that I'm going to give you, and maybe we can do this together. Maybe you're probably more tidy than me, in which case, go you. But I'm just going to unpack what it's like when I have a mess around me. It's very subtle, but I actually get more stressed, and I have this feeling of not being in control when I have a messy space around me. Now, my office is the messiest room in my little house. My bedroom's clean, my kitchen's clean, my living room's clean. Everywhere else is pretty good. But my office is just something, it's like a halfway space where I teach music from here, I make music from here, and I record this podcast in here. And I'm surrounded by musical instruments. I'm surrounded by towers of sheet music and musical equipment. There's some car parts in here as well because I only have a 1-car garage and I've got, no space. So what do we do, I guess? What do I do about this mess? And what do you do about your mess? I think the number one rule is to maintain that concentration so that when I'm doing something, I put away whatever I'm using as soon as I'm finished using it. So I'm looking at 2 glasses and 1 mug here that I'm going to go and put in the dishwasher as soon as I stop recording this episode. I've got stuff that can be put away in drawers. I've got stuff that can be stacked and filed. I've got things that can be put in their place. Guitars that can be put back in their cases and stacked against the wall. Rubbish that needs to be put in the bin. I've got a packet of chips that's been sitting here open with about 5 chips left and it's been there for about a week. I'm not going to eat those. They're probably soft and stale by now. So you know what I mean? It's just a matter of doing that stuff and I'm psyching myself up for this. What can you do? I reckon so many of these things just start with making a beginning and making a start, and it doesn't have to be this monumental upheaval of starting on a huge cleaning frenzy. It just needs to be upkept and done one thing at a time. But for me, I really like every 6 months or so, I'll clean out my spaces. I'll vacuum under the bed. I'll take a look at the clothes in my wardrobe. And if I haven't worn something in a year or so, I'll give it to the op shop. And that means that my space is curated and it's really nice and orderly, and it actually makes me feel better. And I think from where I used to be in my active addiction, every space that I had was a mess and I just did not consider what was going on. My bed sheets hadn't been changed in a long time. I used to, when I was in a share house, it was just disastrous. And then when I was at home, my mum picked up where I left off, and she did all my washing, she did all my cleaning. She'd chastise me, and I'd just say, I would just be so dismissive of it, and I just want to go and use and forget about the whole thing. Now today I actually have grown past that, and I'm accountable for my actions. And if I live in a pigsty, then the only person that can change that is me. So I've told you what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to do some vacuuming as well. It's one of those things. But what will happen as soon as I finish this episode and start doing that is I will begin to feel better. It'll feel much like what happens when we work the steps, is that with every step that we complete, we feel this weight. And I've talked about the backpack full of rocks concept that I really love. The backpack full of rocks, every time we do something in our program, we actually take a rock out and it feels lighter. Well, this messy space that I've got here, I can feel a lot better if I put things away and make it a little bit more orderly. Even if I don't do everything at once, even if I just put 10 things away and clean up and put some rubbish in the bin and take some dishes away to be washed in the dishwasher. That's how we do it. I reckon that's a really, really, really helpful thing. And it just makes me feel a little bit lighter. I think that's probably the best thing. And I will make a challenge for you today. If you're listening to this, go and put one thing away. Go and do something. Go and take responsibility for your space. Whether that means that you make your bed for the first time in a while, or you put your shoes in the wardrobe, or you do something, I don't know, it can be anything. Do all the dishes. Get rid of all the mess. Put all the rubbish that you can see away in the bin. Something like that, like a nice curated space, is the most amazing way to just put a little bit of a smile on your face and a little bit of weight off your shoulders, is that your space is curated and it's in your control. And it's so much more calming, I find. If my bedroom's messy, I struggle to get to sleep. I reckon that's the best thing. And when I do that, I do definitely feel better. So I'm going to go and do that right now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that topic today, the higher power. We'll talk more on that. I'll unpack it. And I think you got to do that challenge. Curate your space. A tidy living space is so good for us. Anyway, if you got any questions, jump on www.rehab.melbourne. The staff at Hills and Ranges Private will answer any questions you have. Have a great day. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Recovery Cast. For more, visit us at www.rehab.melbourne.